based on my 13 keys to the White House, which has correctly predicted the outcomes of presidential elections in America since 1984. The result is that America is going to have a new and path-breaking president. That is, Kamala Harris will become the first woman president of the United States, at least cracking, if not shattering, the glass ceiling, and she will become the first president of mixed African and East Asian descent, kind of foreshadowing where America is going. We're rapidly becoming a majority-minority country.
And just briefly, if you would, take us through the sort of predictors that you use to explain this prediction.
Yes, my model is unique. I don't pay attention to the pundits. I don't have a scientific basis for their opinions. I ignore the polls, which are snapshots, but abused as predictors. Rather, I developed the 13 keys to the White House, going all the way back to 1860. I developed it in 81, based upon the proposition that American presidential elections are essentially votes, up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. Believe it or not, it's governance, not campaigning, that counts. The keys look at midterm election results, incumbency, contests for the nomination of the incumbent party, third parties, short and long-term economy, policy change, social unrest, scandal, foreign/military failures and successes. And only two keys look at the candidates, and they're very high threshold keys, assessing whether the candidates are those once-in-a-generational, transformational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt or Ronald Reagan.
How do you adjust for the swing states, though? Because we've been told time and again that not only is this contest very close, but it's going to be decided by a few tens of thousands of votes in the swing states.
Trying to predict elections by looking at the swing states is a fool's errand. Even the most eminent of academic modelers who try to compile results by looking at the swing states create errors. The most prominent of them was predicting a near Clinton landslide in 2016. The keys take a different approach. They look at simple integral parameters that are tightly correlated with the outcome of the election without having to parse out individual states. And they have a successful 40-year track record. So even though they're national, they're still virtually perfectly correlated with who's going to win. Thus, I predicted against all odds and, all the pundits and the pollsters and the state level modelers that Donald Trump would win the presidency in 2016. I won the Steckler Award for courage and forecasting, but I was not very popular in 90% plus Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University.
But you did fail to forecast George W. Bush's narrow victory in 2000. So what went wrong there?
I didn't go wrong. Florida did, as I explained to Bill Maher a number of years ago. As I proved in my report to the prestigious United States Commission on Civil Rights, it's still up on the website, the wrong person was elected in Florida and elected president. That based on the intent of voters, Al Gore should have won Florida, going away because Florida discarded tens of thousands of ballots cast by African Americans who didn't trust the system, quite rightly, headed by the Republican candidate's brother. So on those crazy punch cards, they not only punched in Al Gore, they wrote in Al Gore just to be sure. And guess what? Florida threw out, rejected all of those ballots. So I would say
hanging chair
I was right.
election. Yeah. I mean, is there a risk in ignoring day-to-day events, though, that there could be an upset, a surprise, something cataclysmic that wrong foots your model?
Great question. And my answer is the biggest myth in American politics is the October surprise. For 40 years, I've made my predictions before that, and I've never changed them. And they've been right, I would say, even in 2000, but we're not here to relitigate that. So the keys are the Northern Star of prediction. They don't change. And the reason is fundamentals, the big picture of how elections really work, and that distinguishes them from the pundits, the pollsters, and every other academic modeler as well.
So, for, as you've explained, things like the economy, for example, that underlying performance isn't going to change between now and polling day potentially.
That's right. My short-term economic key is there is no recession in the election year. There's not going to be a recession in the next 50 days or so. The long-term economic key looks at per capita economic growth throughout the term. That's
Mm.
not going to fundamentally change in a few weeks.
Mm.
So I understand why the media is obsessed with polls and the horse race. They have to cover the election every single day. And all of you in the media are my buddies, but you can't just say, Lichtman makes this prediction, see you in a few months, end of story. But the truth is, the big picture really does define the outcome, not the ephemeral day-to-day events.
Yeah.
And I deliberately issued my forecast of a Harris victory before the big Harris-Trump debate that all the pundits were saying was going to make or break the candidates. It was irrelevant to the big picture.
And one of your keys about charisma, you claim that Trump is not charismatic because he's got too narrow a base. I mean, obviously, his supporters would dispute that. Charisma is very much, part of what they're voting on. So just explain that.
Yes, absolutely. He appeals to his supporters, but that's not the definition of the key. If you're going to use my system, you've got to stick to how the keys are defined. And charisma is just a shorthand. When you read my book, Predicting the Next President, you'll see I define it very carefully. You have to be one of those once in a generation, across the board, across party lines, broadly inspirational, transformational candidate like FDR or Reagan. Trump
Mm.
does not fit that definition because while he appeals to a fervent base, it's a narrow base. In 4 years as president, his approval rating averaged 41%, the
Mm.
narrow base, right at the bottom of all presidents. In 2 elections, he lost the vote of the people by a combined 10 million votes. FDR and Reagan won 6 elections by landslide. So I'm not disparaging Trump in any way. I'm not saying his followers don't love him. I'm just saying he doesn't fit the definition of the key that's tested since 1860.
Yeah. And just briefly a word on the model that you're using. It was inspired by a Soviet seismologist, right?
That's absolutely correct. Vladimir Kyla-Sporak, who I met at Caltech in 1981, and it was his idea to use the methodology of pattern recognition that he used for earthquake prediction to predict elections. So we became the odd couple of political research, and we reconceptualized presidential elections in geophysical terms, not as Carter versus Reagan or Republican versus Democrat, but as stability, the White House party stays in power, and earthquake, they're booted out of power. And then we use the methodology of pattern recognition from Kyla-Sporak to look at every American election from the horse and buggy days of politics in 1860 through 1980. Remember, this is 81. And that led us to the 13 keys and our decision rule. If 6 or more keys are negative, the White House party loses. Fewer than 6 negative keys, stability.
And so finally, it is going to be a close election. We know that. Would you stake good money on the fact that you've got it right?
Hey, I never bet on my own predictions because I won't jinx them.
Hmm.
I don't recommend anyone else bet on them, but I do have a 40-year track record that no one else comes close to. That doesn't mean I can't be wrong. I'm a human being. Of course, I can be wrong. And I'm 77. I've been doing this forever, but I still have butterflies in my stomach because unlike the pollsters like Nate Silver, who give you these phony probabilities, 70% Clinton's going to win. See, when she loses, I told you she had a 30% chance of losing. I tell you who's going to win and who's going to lose. So I can be proven right
Yeah.
or wrong.
Well, we'll see in just a few weeks' time. Allan Lichtman, thank you very much for joining us.